Family forces me to move home and raise my sister's kids since I'm still childless. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. My mother looked around my custom-designed apartment and said, "You'll need to sell this place by Friday. Sarah's kids need the money." I was standing in the middle of the living room I had spent 3 years meticulously renovating, holding a cup of coffee that had gone ice cold. She didn't blink. She didn't stutter. She just sat on my imported Italian leather sofa, smoothing her skirt, and delivered the ultimatum that was supposed to end my entire life as I knew it. "Excuse me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I thought I had misheard her. I had to have misheard her. Barbara sighed, that heavy, dramatic sigh she reserved for whenever I was being difficult. "Elena, please don't make this harder than it has to be. Your sister is having a mental breakdown. She needs a year off, a wellness retreat. And since you don't have a family of your own or any real responsibilities, it only makes sense for you to step in." I stared at her. I am 32 years old. I am a senior architect at one of the top commercial firms in the city. I manage multi-million-dollar projects, oversee a team of 12 junior designers, and I worked 80-hour weeks for a decade to get here. My career is my life. It is my passion, the culmination of everything I ever worked for since I was a teenager sketching floor plans. And my mother was casually asking me to throw a lit match on all of it, just because Sarah snapped her fingers. "You want me to quit my job?" I asked, my blood pressure spiking. "You want me to sell my home, give up my career, and move back to the suburbs to raise Sarah's 3 children for a year?" "It's just for a year," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "You can always draw buildings later. Sarah's mental health is the priority right now. Family comes first, Elena. You've always been so selfish with your time. This is your chance to finally contribute something meaningful." I looked at the woman who raised me, realizing just how completely delusional she actually was. She expected me to pack up my entire existence, surrender my hard-earned independence, and become a substitute mother on a moment's notice. But there was something else in her eyes, a frantic, desperate energy that didn't match the casual tone of her voice. Something was very wrong with this picture, and I wasn't going to let it slide. I had no idea how deep this twisted family nightmare was about to pull me under. To understand the absolute audacity of my mother's demand, you have to understand the toxic dynamic that has defined my family for the last 3 decades. In my mother's eyes, there are 2 types of women in this world. There is my older sister, Sarah, the golden child who married a wealthy man, popped out 3 kids in quick succession, and spends her days managing an overly decorated suburban McMansion. And then there is me, Elena, the stubborn, child-free career woman who is constantly viewed as a tragic disappointment because I prefer blueprints over baby bottles. Growing up, everything was always about Sarah. Her cheerleading, her wedding, her baby showers. My achievements were always an afterthought. When I graduated at the top of my architecture class, my mother's only comment was, "That's nice, honey, but don't work so hard that you forget to find a husband." When I bought my dream apartment in the city, entirely with my own money, Barbara refused to attend the housewarming party because she thought the neighborhood wasn't family-friendly. For years, I endured a relentless barrage of passive-aggressive comments at every single family gathering. "Elena, when are you going to settle down? Elena, your biological clock is ticking. Elena, your career won't keep you warm at night." It was exhausting. They viewed my independence not as an accomplishment, but as a selfish rebellion against the natural order of things. Sarah played right into it, constantly weaponizing her motherhood to make herself the center of the universe. If she was tired, the whole family had to stop and cater to her. Meanwhile, Mark, her husband, would sit in the corner, swilling expensive bourbon and looking down his nose at my modest life choices. He ran some sort of high-end logistics company, and he never missed an opportunity to remind me how much money he made. They were the picture-perfect suburban family, and I was the black sheep. So why, after years of treating me like an unfulfilled pariah, were they suddenly begging me to take over the very life they claimed was so superior? The math simply wasn't adding up. I decided I needed to face my sister directly to see what was really going on. The next evening, I was summoned to Sarah's sprawling, chaotic house in the suburbs for a mandatory family meeting. As soon as I walked through the heavy oak front door, I knew it was a carefully orchestrated ambush. Sarah was sitting in the center of the living room, surrounded by crumpled tissues, doing her absolute best impression of a tragic heroine. My mother hovered over her, rubbing her shoulders protectively, while Mark stood silently by the fireplace, staring into his glass of whiskey. "Elena, thank God you're here," Sarah whimpered, dabbing her perfectly dry eyes with a tissue. I can't do this anymore. I'm having a total mental breakdown. The stress of the kids, Mark's business, the house, it's just destroying me. My therapist says I need a year off. A complete wellness retreat in Europe to find myself again." I stared at her, completely dumbfounded. "A year? You want to leave your 3 young children for an entire year to go find yourself in Europe?" Barbara cut in, her voice sharp and authoritative. "Don't judge your sister, Elena. Motherhood is incredibly taxing. You wouldn't understand, since you only have to worry about yourself. Sarah needs this. Mark needs to focus entirely on his business to keep the family afloat. That leaves you." "Leaves me what?" I snapped, my patience instantly evaporating. "To take the kids," Barbara yelled, throwing her hands in the air. "Who else is going to do it? You have an empty apartment. You have no husband. You have no real responsibilities. It is your duty as her sister to step up, take a leave of absence from your little drafting job, and move back here to keep this family together." "My little drafting job pays for my entire life, Mother," I shot back, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. "I am not quitting my career to be a free nanny so Sarah can go drink wine in Tuscany for 12 months. Sarah wailed loudly, burying her face in her hands, while Mark finally looked up from his drink, his eyes dark and desperate. "Please, Elena," Mark muttered, his voice strained. "We are completely out of options here." I suddenly looked at Mark's trembling hands and realized he was sweating profusely despite the cold. "The answer is absolutely, unequivocally no," I stated, my voice ringing out clearly in the tense living room. "I love my nieces and nephew, but I am not their mother. I am not ruining my life because you two refuse to handle yours. You need to hire a nanny or find a local treatment center, but I am completely off the table." With that, I grabbed my coat and walked out the front door, leaving my mother screaming my name from the porch. I drove back to my city apartment with my heart pounding in my chest, feeling a mix of adrenaline and deep, nauseating guilt. Had I been too harsh? They were family, after all, but the sheer entitlement of their demand hardened my resolve. I was not going to be bullied into a life I never chose. By the next morning, the fallout was apocalyptic. My phone started vibrating at 6 a.m. and didn't stop for 3 days. Barbara had clearly launched a massive, coordinated smear campaign against me across our entire extended network. I received furious text messages from aunts, uncles, and cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. The vitriol was stunning and relentlessly cruel. I was called a selfish spinster, a heartless careerist, and a disgrace to the family name. One cousin left a scathing voicemail telling me that I would die old and alone surrounded by my precious blueprints. They painted me as a monster who was actively trying to destroy a poor, suffering mother's mental health. The guilt trips were meticulously designed to break my spirit and force me into submission. It was a classic toxic family tactic. Isolate the dissenter, bombard them with immense shame, and wait for them to cave under the pressure. But they fundamentally underestimated how much I valued the peaceful, independent life I had built for myself. I turned off my phone notifications, poured myself a large glass of wine, and adamantly refused to answer a single message. I stood my ground, knowing I had made the right choice to protect my own sanity and career. Then, a strange, unexpected text message from Sarah's next-door neighbor completely changed the entire horrific narrative. The text from the neighbor was short and utterly confusing. "Hey Elena, saw the moving trucks at Sarah's today. Are they relocating?" Moving trucks? Sarah hadn't mentioned anything about moving, only a temporary wellness retreat in Europe. I stared at the screen, my stomach tying itself into a tight knot. It was my youngest niece's birthday the next day, and despite the brutal family war raging, I had bought her a wooden dollhouse. I decided to use the gift as an excuse to go over there unannounced and see what the hell was actually happening behind closed doors. When I pulled into their driveway, the moving trucks were gone, but the house felt utterly different. I let myself in with the spare key they forgot I had. The living room, usually cluttered with toys and chaotic family life, was eerily spotless. But it wasn't just clean, it was systematically hollowed out. The massive, ridiculously expensive Persian rug that Mark always bragged about was missing. The original oil paintings that usually hung in the hallway were gone, leaving only pale shadows on the walls. "Hello," I called out, but the house was dead silent. I walked upstairs towards Sarah's master bedroom to drop the gift off. The door was slightly ajar. I peeked inside and felt a cold chill run down my spine. The room had been aggressively stripped. Mark had a custom glass display case for his prized collection of vintage Rolex watches. It was completely empty. Sarah's sprawling jewelry vanity, usually overflowing with diamonds, was wiped totally clean. People going to a wellness retreat don't pack up their entire house. They certainly don't secretly liquidate their most untraceable, high-value assets. A dark, terrifying suspicion formed in the back of my mind. This wasn't a temporary mental health break. This looked exactly like a frantic, desperate liquidation. They were turning everything into pure cash. I stood in the empty bedroom, holding the dollhouse, realizing the story they told us was a massive, elaborate lie. I quickly ducked into Mark's dark office, just as the heavy front door suddenly swung open. I held my breath, pressing my back against the cold wall of Mark's darkened home office. I could hear heavy, frantic footsteps coming up the stairs. It was Mark. He was pacing furiously in the hallway, practically hyperventilating, and speaking rapidly into his cell phone. His usual arrogant, booming voice was reduced to a desperate, aggressive hiss. "I don't care what the penalty fees are, just wire the damn money to the offshore account today." Mark spat into the phone, his voice shaking with absolute panic. "The feds are sniffing around the secondary corporate ledgers. We are completely out of time. Did you expedite the passports for me and Sarah? Good. No, the kids aren't coming. We dropped them with her sister on Friday, and we are on the red-eye to Belize by midnight." My blood ran completely cold. The heavy dollhouse nearly slipped from my trembling hands. Offshore accounts? Feds? Belize? No kids? My brain struggled to process the sheer magnitude of the pure evil I was eavesdropping on. They weren't going on a European wellness retreat to heal Sarah's delicate mental health. They were committing massive corporate fraud, liquidating their stolen assets, and preparing to flee the jurisdiction. And the most sickening part of all, they were permanently abandoning their 3 young children and tricking me into taking full legal and financial responsibility for them before they vanished forever. How do you look at 3 innocent kids, knowing their parents are leaving them forever? I waited in terrified silence until Mark hurried back downstairs and left the house, the slam of the front door echoing in the empty halls. I didn't confront him. I knew if I tipped them off now, they would just run faster. I pulled out my phone and dialed the only person in my family who possessed a functioning moral compass and a sharp, analytical mind. Uncle Joe. He was my mother's older brother, a retired police detective who had always seen right through Sarah and Mark's pretentious, wealthy facade. "Uncle Joe," I whispered into the phone, my voice trembling. "I need your help right now." I waited anxiously as the phone rang, knowing our entire family was about to be destroyed. Uncle Joe didn't hesitate for a single second. Within an hour, I was sitting at the worn kitchen table in his small, unassuming house on the other side of town. I told him everything. The bizarre family ambush, the empty house, the missing valuables, and the terrifying phone call I had overheard in the dark office. Joe listened silently, his jaw tightening, his cop instincts instantly kicking into high gear. He didn't offer any empty platitudes or tell me I was overreacting. He just opened his beat-up laptop and started making calls to his old contacts in the financial fraud division. "If Mark is talking about federal investigations and secondary ledgers, there will be a paper trail," Joe grunted, typing rapidly into a public records database. Guys like Mark always think they are smarter than the system, right up until the handcuffs click. We spent the next 4 hours following a terrifying digital breadcrumb trail. The facade of my sister's perfect, wealthy life crumbled right before my eyes. Joe pulled up the county property records first. The sprawling suburban McMansion that my mother was always so endlessly proud of, it was secretly in deep pre-foreclosure. They hadn't paid their massive mortgage in over 8 months. The bank was legally preparing to seize the property by the end of the month. Then, Joe used a connection at the courthouse to look into Mark's highly touted logistics company. The reality was staggering. The business wasn't just struggling, it was completely dead in the water. Mark was being actively investigated for embezzling millions of dollars from his investors to fund his lavish lifestyle and cover up his massive gambling debts. 2 days ago, a federal judge had quietly ordered all of Mark's known domestic business accounts to be completely frozen. They were entirely out of legal money. They were drowning in a sea of criminal debt, and the federal hammer was about to drop. Uncle Joe clicked on one final document that made the true horror of their plan undeniable. "Look at this, Elena," Uncle Joe said, his voice dropping to a gravelly, sickening whisper. He turned the laptop screen toward me, displaying a confidential travel manifest his buddy at the agency had just flagged. It wasn't a booking for a luxurious European wellness retreat. It was a pair of first-class plane tickets purchased entirely with untraceable cryptocurrency. The names on the tickets were Mark and Sarah. The destination was a remote, tropical country well known for having absolutely no extradition treaties with the United States. And the most damning detail of all, they were one-way tickets. There was no return flight booked. There were no tickets for my nieces and nephew. The reality hit me with the force of a physical blow, knocking the wind completely out of my lungs. My sister, the self-proclaimed perfect mother, the golden child who constantly belittled my child-free life, was planning to permanently abandon her own flesh and blood to save her own skin. They were going to drop those 3 beautiful, innocent children at my apartment under the guise of a temporary family favor. Then, they were going to board a plane and simply vanish into the ether, leaving me to deal with the traumatized kids, the furious federal investigators, and the utter collapse of their fraudulent lives. "They are leaving them," I choked out, tears of pure rage finally spilling over my cheeks. "They are literally going to dump the kids on my doorstep and run away forever. They set me up. They needed a patsy," Joe said grimly, slamming the laptop shut. "They knew your mother would bully you into taking the kids. If they left them with a stranger or the state, child services would flag them immediately, and the feds would grab them at the airport. You were their perfect, convenient cover story to buy them enough time to escape." I quickly wiped my eyes, feeling the absolute shock violently morph into a cold, terrifying determination. The sheer, unadulterated evil of their plans settled heavily in my chest. Sarah and Mark were completely willing to sacrifice my entire future, my hard-earned career, and the psychological well-being of their own children, just to fund their tropical escape from federal prison. They thought I was just the obedient, childless sister who could be easily bullied and discarded by the family machine. They thought they had backed me into a corner. They had absolutely no idea that they had just handed me the match to burn their entire world down. "We can't just call the police right now," Uncle Joe warned, reading my furious expression. "If the feds move in before the flight, Mark and Sarah will just claim they were going on a normal vacation and the kids were safe with you. We need to catch them in the absolute act of abandonment, with the whole family watching." He was right. I didn't just want justice. I wanted total, undeniable exposure. I immediately picked up my phone and called a ruthless, highly recommended family lawyer I had met through my architectural firm. I explained the entire insane situation, the impending flight, the federal fraud investigation, and the imminent abandonment of the 3 children. The lawyer moved with terrifying speed. Within a few hours, we had drafted rock-solid emergency guardianship papers. I wasn't going to let those kids become wards of the state when their parents inevitably became international fugitives. I was going to legally secure my nieces and nephew under my own strict terms, completely cutting Barbara and the rest of the toxic enablers out of the equation. I was going to protect those kids, but I was going to do it my way. The trap was perfectly set, but then my cell phone rang with a completely unexpected disaster. I stared at the caller ID flashing on my screen. It was Sarah. I took a deep, steadying breath, forced my voice into a state of calm neutrality, and answered. "Hello, Sarah." "Elena." "Oh my God. Thank you for picking up," Sarah practically shrieked into the phone. Her voice was trembling with a chaotic mix of fake tears and very real, barely concealed panic. "Listen, I am so sorry about the fight the other night. You were right to be angry, but things have gotten so much worse. My therapist says I am at a complete breaking point. The clinic in Europe called, and they have an emergency opening. The retreat moved up. We have to leave immediately." "Immediately?" I asked, keeping my tone perfectly flat. "What does that mean, Sarah?" "It means we have to drop the kids off at your apartment in 48 hours, she sobbed. laying the manipulation on as thick as she possibly could. Please, Elena. I know you said no, but I am begging you as your sister. Mom says she will come help you on the weekends. We will pay you back for everything when we get home. If you don't take them by Friday night, I don't know what I am going to do. I might not survive this. It took every ounce of willpower I possessed not to scream at her through the phone. She was weaponizing her own children, using suicide threats as leverage to facilitate her criminal escape. I knew exactly what this rushed timeline meant. Mark's financial walls were collapsing faster than they anticipated. The feds were likely closing in on the final frozen accounts, and their non-extradition flight was imminent. They were terrified, backed into a corner, and desperately trying to dump the kids before the handcuffs came out. I closed my eyes, swallowed my rage, and delivered the exact lie she needed to hear. Okay, Sarah, I said, letting a heavy, defeated sigh escape my lips. I'll do it. I will take the kids for the year, so you can go to Europe and get better. I could practically hear the massive, euphoric wave of relief wash over her on the other end of the line. She began crying hysterically, thanking me profusely, calling me her savior and the best sister in the world. It was nauseating, but before she could hang up and finalize her escape, I reeled her back in. But I have one strict condition, I stated firmly, leaving absolutely no room for argument. If I am going to completely uproot my life, quit my career, and take on 3 children, I need the whole family to be on the same page. I want you, Mark, Mom, and the kids to come to my apartment tomorrow night. I am hosting a big send-off dinner. I want a proper goodbye, and I want Mom there to formally witness the handover. Sarah hesitated. I could hear the gears grinding in her panicked brain. They were desperate to just drop the kids and run to the airport, but they couldn't risk me backing out at the last second. They needed my absolute compliance to make their clean getaway. Okay, Sarah finally agreed, her voice tight. Tomorrow night. We will be there. Thank you, Elena. You have no idea what this means to us. Oh, I think I have a pretty good idea, I replied quietly and ended the call. I immediately called Uncle Joe to finalize the logistics of our trap. I wasn't just going to confront Sarah and Mark. I was going to brutally expose them in front of the very mother who had enabled their toxic behavior my entire life. I spent the next 24 hours carefully preparing the most explosive dinner party in family history. By 7 p.m. the next evening, my sleek, custom-designed apartment was packed with the worst people I knew. The kids were happily playing in the spare bedroom, completely oblivious to the fact that their parents were preparing to abandon them forever. Sarah walked in wearing dark sunglasses and a tragic expression, playing the role of the exhausted, broken mother to absolute perfection. My mother, Barbara, was practically glowing with smug satisfaction. She strutted around my living room, sipping her wine and offering a relentless stream of condescending advice. Now, Elena, remember that children need strict routines, Barbara lectured loudly, making sure everyone in the room could hear her. You can't just sleep in until noon like you usually do. This is going to be a huge adjustment for your selfish lifestyle, but I am just so proud of Sarah for having the incredible bravery to finally seek help. I smiled tightly, pouring more wine. Yes, Sarah's bravery is truly staggering, Mom. While Barbara gloated, Mark was a complete wreck. He was standing near the door, his face pale and glistening with cold sweat. He kept aggressively checking his massive gold watch, tapping his foot frantically against my hardwood floors. His eyes darted toward the hallway every few minutes, calculating how quickly they could dump the kids and escape. They had a midnight flight to catch to a non-extradition country, and the clock was ticking down to their glorious freedom. Uncle Joe sat quietly at the head of the dining table, his arms crossed over his chest, watching the entire disgusting charade unfold with cold, calculating police eyes. I waited patiently until everyone was seated at the dinner table before making my final move. Barbara tapped her wine glass with a silver fork, demanding everyone's attention. I just want to propose a quick toast, she beamed, looking adoringly at Sarah. To my beautiful daughter. We are so incredibly proud of you for taking this wellness journey. And to Elena, for finally stepping up and learning what true family responsibility actually looks like. To family, Mark muttered, taking a massive, frantic gulp of his expensive red wine, checking his watch again. Yes, to family, I echoed, setting my glass down on the table. The polite smile completely vanished from my face, replaced by a cold, terrifying calm. Speaking of responsibility, I think we should go over the exact itinerary for your European wellness retreat. I reached under my chair, grabbed a thick manila folder I had prepared, and tossed it violently onto the center of the dining table. It hit the wood with a loud, sharp smack. I pulled out the top document and slid it directly toward my confused mother. "What is this?" Barbara asked, squinting at the paper. "Those are one-way, first-class plane tickets to Belize, departing at midnight tonight," I stated loudly, my voice echoing in the silent room. "Purchased with untraceable cryptocurrency. Notice how there are absolutely no tickets for the children." Sarah gasped loudly, the color instantly draining from her face. Mark froze entirely, his wine glass halfway to his mouth. I didn't stop. I pulled out the next stack of papers and threw them across the table. "And these are the official foreclosure notices for your beautiful suburban house," followed by the federal court orders freezing all of Mark's business accounts due to a massive, multi-million-dollar embezzlement investigation. I suddenly pulled out the final legal document and slammed it directly down onto the table. "These are emergency guardianship papers," I announced, staring daggers into Sarah's terrified eyes. "You aren't going to a wellness retreat. You are fleeing the country to avoid federal prison, and you were planning to permanently abandon your 3 innocent children in my living room to buy yourselves a head start." The silence in the room was absolutely deafening. Sarah's fake, tragic tears instantly vanished, replaced by a look of pure, cornered animal panic. Barbara looked from the foreclosure notices to the printed one-way tickets, her jaw hanging open in absolute horror. The golden child facade had violently shattered into a million undeniable pieces right in front of her. "You crazy bitch," Mark suddenly roared, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. He threw his wine glass against the wall, shattering it into pieces, and bolted out of his chair toward the front door. He was going to make a run for it before the authorities arrived, but he didn't make it 2 steps. Uncle Joe stood up with terrifying speed, stepping squarely in front of the door. He crossed his massive arms, blocking the exit entirely. "Sit back down, Mark," Joe growled, his deep, authoritative cop voice vibrating through the room. "You aren't going anywhere tonight. Mom, you have to help us," Sarah shrieked, turning to Barbara in desperate hysterics. "She's lying. Elena is just jealous and trying to ruin us." "Look at the tickets, Mom," I said coldly. "Look at the frozen bank accounts. If you help them leave this apartment, you are actively aiding and abetting fleeing federal felons, and you will go to prison right alongside them. They lied to you. They used you, and they were going to sacrifice their own children to save themselves." Barbara stared at her favorite daughter, her entire worldview collapsing as she finally realized the truth. Uncle Joe had already called his contacts at the FBI before the dinner even started. 15 minutes later, federal agents knocked heavily on my door. Sarah and Mark were handcuffed right there in my living room, screaming and blaming each other as they were hauled away. They never made it to the airport, and they certainly never made it to Belize. Mark is currently facing 20 years in federal prison for massive corporate fraud, and Sarah is facing severe accessory charges and child abandonment. As for me, I kept my beautiful apartment and my successful architectural career. I was granted full legal custody of my nieces and nephew. I hired a wonderful full-time nanny using the emergency funds I legally forced Sarah to surrender during the proceedings. I stepped up and became the parent those kids actually deserved, but I did it on my own strict terms, without sacrificing the life I had worked so hard to build. The hardest part was the aftermath with Barbara. She tried to apologize, claiming she had been blinded by Sarah's manipulation. But the damage was far too deep. I realized that an enabler is just as dangerous as the abuser. I completely cut her and the rest of the toxic relatives who harassed me out of my life permanently. If you are the scapegoat in your family, constantly belittled for your choices, hear this. You do not owe toxic people your peace just because you share DNA. True family isn't about blood. It's about who actually protects you when the walls start closing in. Set your boundaries made of iron. Trust your gut instincts, and never let anyone manipulate you into abandoning yourself. I looked at my nieces, knowing I had finally broken our toxic generational family curse forever.